Narrator's name, Jenna Hart. By the time the notary finished reading the last paragraph, my stepmother's smile had turned to stone, and my brother's hand found mine under the table. The room smelled like lemon cleaner and paper, and everything inside me was shaking, but not from fear, because the one page nobody had counted on was still sealed in my bag, and once it hit the table, the $650,000 wasn't hers anymore. You clicked for justice, for the truth about how a family tried to cut me out of my own father's will, and for the exact clause that changed everything. This is After Her Lies, my channel where I walk you through what greed looks like up close and how to hold it still until it shows its real face. Today, I'll show you how I overturned a done deal at a will reading in Columbus, Ohio, using a document that sat ignored for 7 months and a recording that almost never saw daylight. I'm 35. I'm stubborn in the way that only daughters get when their father taught them to keep receipts, and I am not afraid of a notary's seal. I grew up on Glendale Avenue, a split level with a maple out front and an '89 Bronco that bled oil down the driveway. My dad, Michael Hart, ran a small HVAC company he'd started in 2002. When he remarried on May 17, 2016, 2 years after my mom passed, he told my brother and me, "Everyone in, nobody out." Her name was Suzanne. She had 2 adult kids from her first marriage, Dylan and Kendra, both older than me and my brother Caleb. We were polite at first, then distant, and then something colder when Suzanne started managing Dad's medications and scheduling to take things off his plate. Dad died the day after Thanksgiving, November 29, 2024, at 7:43 p.m., with a hospital bracelet digging into his wrist and the game on mute. The stakes were simple and heavy, a $650,000 inheritance, mostly coming from the sale of Dad's business and life insurance, the deed to our childhood house, and a trust he set up in 2018 that was supposed to lock things down if his health turned. The official words that would govern our grief were everywhere: will, codicil, power of attorney, durable medical directive, revocable living trust, deed. And if you've ever sat in a fluorescent-lit office with people who want your place at the table, you know the stakes were not just money. They were closeness, legitimacy, the last handshake from someone you can't call back. The first wave of wrongness hit 3 days after the funeral, when Suzanne texted a photo of an envelope. Will reading is December 12th at 10 a.m. at Franklin Trust Services. Be there. No condolences, just the tone people use when they've already counted the money. The second wave was the rumor I heard at the reception from my Aunt Linda that Dad had updated everything in November to be fair to everyone, and that Suzanne now had full discretion as successor trustee. Linda meant it kindly, like sewing a patch over a wound, but I recognized the shape of a trap. Full discretion is the phrase greedy people use to pretend they're being generous. The day before the reading, I stopped by Dad's office to return his coffee mug and met a locked file cabinet where his desk used to be. The foreman, Neil, told me the company had already been sold to a partner for $310,000 on December 6th, and the proceeds were in escrow. I knew the company had a conservative valuation around $420,000 the last time Dad talked numbers in 2022, and that he carried no debt except a $3,800 monthly mortgage and a leased van. Selling quietly for $110,000 under the last valuation smelled off. especially when the buyer turned out to be a limited liability company formed on November 20th, 2024, by Dylan using a friend's address in Westerville. The state filing date was a matter of public record. That night, I sat cross-legged on my living room floor with Dad's old accordion folder that I'd taken home the week he fell ill. It had felt wrong to take it. Then suddenly, it felt like oxygen. In the back of that folder was a thin manila sleeve stamped, Restate June 2023. Inside, there was a copy of a trust restatement signed June 12, 2023, notarized by a woman named Carla Bishop. On page 7, under Successor Trustee, my name came first, then Caleb's, not Suzanne's. And under Distribution, it said, House to Jenna and Caleb, 50-50 tenants in common. Business proceeds to be divided 4 ways. Jenna 40, Caleb 40, and 10 each to Dylan and Kendra, contingent on their cooperation with sale. The amount penciled in the margin Dad's handwriting was $650,000 with a note. Includes $250K term life. I slept with that folder on my nightstand like it could run away. If you think this is where it gets simple, you've never met Suzanne. At Franklin Trust Services, December 12th, we sat at a polished table with coasters that said, Clarity is a gift. The notary, a careful man named Greg Miller, opened a thick binder and said, We have Mr. Hart's original will from 2016 and a codicil dated November 14, 2024. That date punched me. November 14th was the day Dad was admitted to Riverside Methodist for a rapid decline. The codicil, Greg said, appointed Suzanne as sole successor trustee and granted her full discretion to adjust distributions as she deems necessary for the welfare of all heirs, replacing the 2018 trust language. It also named her as agent under a new durable power of attorney dated April 2, 2024, superseding all prior instruments. Suzanne folded her hands like she was in church. Dylan wore a blue blazer and looked bored. Kendra tapped answers in a group chat. I raised my hand. Is there a 2023 restatement? Greg blinked. We have no record of a 2023 restatement. I slid the manila sleeve across the table, my copy face down, heart in my mouth. I do. Greg examined it. A notary stamp, a signature, a name, Carla Bishop. He compared it to the binder's papers. This is a copy, he said carefully. Do you have the original? I don't, I said, but I know where it should be. That was the first obstacle. Originals versus copies. In probate, paper is either gospel or gossip, depending on whose hand held the pen. And in that moment, Greg's eyebrow said, Without the original, this copy is a rumor. Suzanne's mouth lifted at one corner. Michael maintained a lot of drafts, she said. He was indecisive. In November, he finally committed. He told me himself. Caleb squeezed my knee under the table. Dylan leaned forward. Is the will reading over then? We'll proceed with the codicil, right? Not quite, Greg said. We still need to clarify guardianship and agent issues, but yes, as of now, the November 14th codicil is the latest instrument I have on file. And then I saw the clause nobody expected. The clause was on page 3 of the codicil. I asked Greg to read it aloud. Any changes to the successor trustee designation shall be conditioned upon the physical presence of the testator, his full mental capacity, and 2 non-family witnesses in addition to a commissioned notary. There, in small letters, was an unusually strict condition, more stringent than Ohio law generally requires, which Dad insisted on after watching a neighbor get bulldozed by a bad POA. I remembered him muttering about guardrails. The codicil included the guardrail. I also remembered where Dad was on November 14th, on a morphine drip, drifting in and out, and wearing an oxygen cannula. I had the visitor log photos on my phone. I had a time-stamped voice memo where he asked me to feed his goldfish and joked, slurring, about not signing anything that says Dylan can run my company. But courtrooms don't run on jokes. They run on records. Obstacle 2 arrived wrapped in polite words. Greg cleared his throat. I'm going to need to confirm the notarization particulars for both documents. If the 2023 restatement is real, I'll need the original or a certification from the notary. If the 2024 codicil is contested based on incapacity or witness defects, that's a matter for probate court. Suzanne smiled. We're all here in good faith. There's no need to contest. But there was every need, because while Greg was talking, my mind was sprinting through the plan I'd started the night I found the folder. Step 1, find the notary, Carla Bishop. Step 2, find the hospital's records for November 14th to establish incapacity. Step 3, track the sale of the business and find out whether it violated the trust's cooperation contingency. Step 4, secure a copy of the notary's journal entry from the day the codicil was signed. In Ohio, notaries keep logs with IDs, dates, and signatures. If the witnesses weren't two non-family adults, the clause mattered. If the notarization happened in a hospital bed without witnesses present, the clause mattered even more. I called Carla's number that afternoon. No answer. I called again at 8:01 a.m. the next day. She answered on the fourth ring, cautious. I can't discuss client matters, she said. I'm not asking you to discuss, I said. I'm asking whether your journal shows a trust restatement signed June 12, 2023 for Michael Hart. I have a copy. I need to know if you notarized it. Silence, papers rustling. Yes, she said finally, I did. 2 witnesses, me and a bank manager, because we were in the branch. I can provide a certified copy of the journal entry for a fee. How much? $50. I drove to her office with 250s crisp from the ATM and my heart pounding like a drum line. She photocopied the entry, stamped it, signed her own stamp. The journal showed June 12, 2023, Michael Hart, driver's license ending 3329, 2 witnesses non-family, my name highlighted in relief. She also handed me something I didn't expect, an email from Dad, printed and stapled to the journal entry in which he confirmed the restatement and thanked her. The subject line was guardrails. The date was June 13, 2023, 9:42 a.m. I went home and opened the second front, the hospital. I requested Dad's capacity evaluation notes and medication logs for November 14, 2024. It took a week and a release form, but on December 20th, the hospital sent a summary. At 3:30 p.m. On November 14th, he was oriented to person only. He did not know the date. He could not name the president. He was on 5 mg morphine every 4 hours. At 4:05 p.m., they documented slurred speech, confusion, poor short-term memory. That dovetailed badly with a codicil allegedly executed at 4 p.m. in our living room, according to the notarization stamp. Third front, the business sale. I pulled the public filings for the LLC that bought Hart Heating Cooling. The organizer was Dylan's friend, but the email on the Articles of Organization traced back to Dylan's work account. I also obtained a copy of the purchase agreement through Neil, who slid it to me across a diner table like it was contraband. The agreement contained a clause. Existing successor trustee must consent to sale for distributions to be valid. That clause referenced the 2018 trust language, not the November codicil. It was boilerplate the buyer's lawyer had cut and pasted, not realizing we had a fight brewing. If the June 2023 restatement was valid, Dad hadn't changed the successor trustee. I was, and I hadn't consented. My leverage was growing, but leverage without a stage is just weight. The stage arrived in a letter dated January 2, 2025. Franklin County Probate Court hearing, scheduled January 27, 2025, 9 a.m. Petition to admit codicil, dated November 14, 2024. Suzanne had filed to formalize the codicil after Greg refused to distribute based solely on it. That refusal was the quiet hero of this story. A careful notary can be the difference between a family stealing and a family waiting just long enough for you to gather what you need. On January 10th, I filed a competing petition. Objection to admission of codicil. Motion to recognize June 12, 2023 trust restatement. I could not afford a full retainer, but I did book a 2-hour consult with an estate attorney, Teresa Nguyen, who told me to bring 3 things: proof of the 2023 restatement's notarization, hospital records for November 14th, and any evidence that non-family witnesses weren't present for the codicil. Evidence of undue influence would be icing, but icing melts in court if your cake is flimsy. Teresa said something that changed my posture. Ohio doesn't require notaries to keep journals by law, but many do. You've got that. You'll also need to subpoena the notary on the 2024 codicil and the witnesses listed. If the witnesses are family, that guardrail clause may be fatal to the codicil. And if your father lacked capacity, no one can force a codicil through by sheer will. I didn't have money for subpoenas through an attorney, but I could file Pro Se for the subpoenas and pay the clerk's fees. I also had the second piece of leverage I hadn't shown anyone yet: a recording. On November 13th at 8:13 p.m., I had left my phone on the kitchen counter while I went to the garage to fetch Dad's slippers. I'd left the voice memo app running from earlier when Dad had been telling a story. In the 28-minute recording, Suzanne's voice is clear. We need to get this signed tomorrow. You can sign for him if the pen's too heavy. I'll guide his hand. Dylan laughs and mutters something about cleaning up the capitalization. Then Dylan says, as long as there are signatures and a stamp, nobody looks beyond the first page. It is not a perfect recording, no names of documents. But when paired with the hospital log and the guardrail clause, it paints a picture of an intent that chills me months later. I didn't want to be the person who played a secret tape in court, but I also didn't want to be the person who let a lie calcify into a deed. Teresa told me to disclose it ahead of time to avoid surprise objections and to bring a transcript. So I spent a Saturday transcribing all 28 minutes, every cough and clatter of a spoon, and paid a $35 notary fee at a UPS store to notarize my affidavit that the recording was made in my home on my device at the stated time. I filed it with the court on January 21st. I also filed the certified journal copy, the June 13th email, the hospital summary, the business purchase agreement, and an affidavit from Neil stating that no successor trustee consent was obtained prior to sale. The night before the hearing, I drove to the house. The maple in front was trimmed back, and the for sale sign now had a red pending rider. I sat in my car with the heat on and cried for 5 minutes, not just for the house, but for the version of my father who would have found all this unthinkable. I still had a key. I didn't use it. Boundaries also make evidence cleaner. On January 27th, Franklin County Probate Court smelled like sanitizer and old books. The judge, a woman in her 50s with a plain gold ring, called our case at 9:07 a.m. Hard estate. Parties? Teresa sat beside me just for the hearing. She'd agreed to appear limitedly for $750 I'd put on a credit card. Suzanne had a lawyer in a Navy suit who smiled without showing teeth. Greg from Franklin Trust Services was present to explain the file. The notary on the 2024 Codicil, a man named Paul Devlin, sat in the second row. Dylan and Kendra were behind Suzanne, both in dark clothes like they were attending a job interview with a mirror. Suzanne's lawyer stood. Your Honor, the November 14th Codicil is valid and controls. It designates my client as sole successor trustee with full discretion. The 2016 will is admitted. The codicil modifies it. My client has acted prudently for the benefit of all heirs. Teresa rose and said, Your Honor, we object to admission of the codicil on 2 grounds: lack of capacity and failure to meet the instrument's own condition, requiring 2 non-family witnesses. We move instead for recognition of the June 12, 2023 trust restatement, which is notarized with 2 non-family witnesses and is consistent with the decedent's long-standing plan. We also request the court to examine a recording made the evening before the codicil that suggests undue influence. The judge's eyebrows ticked up at recording. She said, Let's take witnesses. Mr. Devlin, step forward. Paul Devlin raised his right hand. He testified that he had notarized a signature for Michael Hart on November 14th around 4 p.m. at the Hart residence. Were there 2 non-family witnesses? Teresa asked. There were 2 witnesses, he said. I didn't check if they were family. Names? He read them off his notes. The first was Dylan's friend, the one on the LLC. The second was Kendra's boyfriend. My stomach dropped and then steadied. Did you verify Mr. Hart's capacity? I confirmed he was alert, Paul said. He nodded when I explained. Did he answer questions? He said his name. Did he name the date? I don't recall. The judge asked for the notary journal. Paul said, I don't maintain one. The judge nodded without reaction. Teresa handed up the hospital's November 14th summary. At 4 p.m., he was noted as slurring, confused, and oriented only to person. She also handed up the June 12, 2023 journal entry from Carla Bishop and the June 13th email. Suzanne's lawyer objected to the recording. The judge admitted it over objection with a limiting instruction. I will consider it for the purpose of context and intent, not as definitive proof of any act. We played a 2-minute excerpt. In the courtroom air, Dylan's laugh sounded harsher than it had in my kitchen. The phrase, guide his hand, sat like a weight on the bench. Then came Greg, who testified that his file contained the 2016 will and the November 14th codicil, but no 2023 restatement. He said, upon being presented with a copy of a 2023 restatement, I requested certification. I did not distribute based on the codicil alone due to the atypical witness requirement and the hospital timeline. The judge turned to Suzanne. Why was the trust restatement not in the decedent's file? Suzanne folded her hands. Michael was a messy record keeper. I watched the judge's face do something precise and small, like the moment when you push a puzzle piece and it clicks. She asked, Ms. Hart, do you have the original 2023 restatement? I said, No, Your Honor. I have a certified journal entry and an email from him to the notary referencing the restatement. Teresa added, and we have testimony from the notary available by affidavit. She's out of state this week. We can file it within 48 hours. Suzanne's lawyer objected again, claimed the restatement was stale and never finalized. The judge said, the notarization and the witness requirements suggest finality. Then she leaned forward. The November 14th Codicil contains a condition tighter than statute. It says 2 non-family witnesses. The notary's testimony is that he did not verify whether the witnesses were family. The names indicate relationships through either blood or affinity. That alone raises serious doubt as to the codicil's compliance with its own condition. Combined with hospital records indicating questionable capacity at the time of execution, and the recording which, while not dispositive, suggests an intent to circumvent capacity, I am inclined to deny admission of the November 14th Codicil. It's hard to describe relief when it hasn't happened yet, but you can feel its edge. The judge continued, I will take the matter under advisement pending the notary's affidavit regarding the June 12, 2023 restatement. In the interim, I enjoin any distribution of estate assets and any transfer of real property. Suzanne stiffened. Her lawyer stood. Your Honor, the business has already been sold. Teresa slid the purchase agreement forward. Without successor trustee consent, per the agreement's own clause. If the 2023 restatement stands, Ms. Hart was the successor trustee. She did not consent. Suzanne's lawyer muttered boilerplate, but the judge set a schedule. Notary affidavit due in 48 hours. Supplemental briefs in 5 days, ruling in 7. I felt time snap into a clean line. And then I saw the clause nobody expected. It was in the LLC operating agreement of the buyer, which I pulled that afternoon from the Secretary of State's website out of habit, because people who lie once usually leave fingerprints twice. There, in Article 8, was a clause stating, any transaction over $250,000 requires a unanimous vote of members. The original member list was just Dylan's friend. 2 days later, an amended member list showed Dylan added as a member with 60 interest, dated December 5, 2024, 1 day before the sale, which meant Dylan voted to approve his own purchase with himself as the majority. It wasn't illegal on its face, but in the context of trust distributions tied to cooperation and successor consent, it became a glowing arrow pointing to self-dealing. I filed the amended operating agreement as a supplemental exhibit and highlighted the dates. November 20th, LLC formed. December 5th, Dylan added as member. December 6th, purchase. December 12th, will reading. January 27th, hearing. 5 days later, the judge issued a written decision. The November 14th, 2024 codicil is denied admission. The court finds it failed to satisfy its own witness condition and was executed under circumstances that call capacity into serious question. The June 12, 2023 trust restatement is recognized as controlling. Jenna Hart is appointed successor trustee. She ordered an accounting from Suzanne within 30 days and enjoined the closing on the house pending trustee approval. She also ordered the business sale proceeds to be deposited into a trust account pending allocation per the restatement. The number that had floated like a dream, 650,000, landed like a ledger line. The day the decision came down, I drove to Franklin Trust Services carrying a binder I'd made with tabs: house, business, insurance, bank, legal. Greg met me with a look that made me feel like my feet had roots. "I'm sorry for your loss," he said simply. It was the first time it sounded like it came from the right place. We held a new meeting. Me, Caleb, Dylan, and Kendra. Suzanne chose not to attend. Dylan arrived with swagger turned down to medium. Kendra wore sunglasses like the conference room lights were paparazzi. I spoke clearly. Per the 2023 restatement, the house goes to me and Caleb 50-50, tenants in common. The business proceeds are to be divided. 40 to me, 40 to Caleb, 10 each to you two, contingent on your cooperation. Cooperation, as we now define it, includes unwinding any self-dealing or agreeing to fair valuation adjustments. Dylan shrugged. It already sold. It sold for $310,000, I said. We have a documented valuation from 2022 at $420,000. That's a $110,000 gap. If you want your 10, you help fill it, either by returning a portion of your distribution or by facilitating a resale at a market price. The judge ordered an accounting. We'll see what the numbers say. Kendra spoke for the first time. I didn't do anything wrong. I know, I said, but right now you're tied to something wrong. You can untie yourself. Greg laid out the mechanics: a trust account, disbursements only upon my authorization as trustee, a title company to handle the deed transfer. He also explained the concept of a surcharge money a person in a fiduciary position might have to pay back if they mishandled trust assets. The word made Dylan flinch. He looked at Kendra. She looked at the table. 3 weeks later, under the weight of the accounting order and the threat of a surcharge, Dylan agreed to relinquish his membership interest in the buyer LLC and unwind certain transaction fees that had mysteriously appeared $8,400 in consulting, $5,600 in transition materials, and to pay $15,000 into the trust account. The buyer agreed to open its books for a second valuation for a $2,500 fee. Kendra, who had truly been a passenger, signed a cooperation affidavit. It felt like turning heavy levers in an engine room, slow and loud and structural. Suzanne filed a motion to reconsider. It was denied. She then filed a motion to remove me as trustee, alleging hostility. The judge smiled thinly in the hearing and said, "Hostility toward misconduct is not cause." She ordered Suzanne to deliver any remaining estate documents to me by 5 p.m. Friday, March 14, 2025. At 4:52 p.m., Suzanne arrived at Franklin Trust Services carrying a white cardboard file box. She placed it on the table and left without a word. Inside was chaos: sticky notes, a baggie of house keys, a bank envelope with $2,000 cash, a December electric bill, and, near the bottom, the original June 12, 2023 trust restatement. The existence of the original was not suspenseful when we had already won, but the feel of that thick paper in my hands closed a loop like the last turn on a jar lid, and then I saw the clause nobody expected. It was on page 9 of the restatement. If any beneficiary contests this instrument, their share shall be reduced to $1. It's a clause people call no contest, generally enforceable in Ohio, but only against contests made without probable cause. Dylan's lawyer had filed a contest of the restatement on January 3rd, claiming it was invalid due to lack of delivery. After the judge's decision and the emergence of the original, that contest was now not just wrong, but reckless. Teresa filed a motion for partial summary judgment, declaring Dylan's contest frivolous and triggering the clause. The judge didn't take it that far. She noted Dylan had some basis for confusion, but she did award $4,000 in attorney's fees payable from Dylan's share, citing his use of the contest to delay accounting. The house closing happened in April. The title company's conference room had a bowl of wrapped candy and a rubber plant bursting out of its pot. Caleb and I signed our names 100 times, and then a deed titled Transfer on Death Affidavit slid into the stack. I'd forgotten Dad had recorded one in 2020, naming me as payable on death for the property. It didn't transfer title automatically on his death because the trust superseded, but it made the chain cleaner. The woman across the table looked at me kindly. "Your dad planned more than you might think," she said. In the end, here is what justice looked like in ledger lines and minutes. The court denied the November 14th codicil and recognized the June 12, 2023 restatement. The house transferred to me and Caleb 50-50 after we paid off a remaining mortgage of $118,000 using a portion of the trust proceeds, which reduced the net value but stabilized our lives. The business sold for $310,000. After the surcharge and adjustments, we got a supplementary payment of $22,000 when the second valuation revealed assets the buyer hadn't counted. A warehouse full of filters and a prepaid service contract. The life insurance of $250,000 paid into the trust on December 3, 2024, per beneficiary designation. I authorized distributions, $232,000 to me, $232,000 to Caleb, $54,000 to Dylan, $50,000 to Kendra after the $4,000 fee deduction. Suzanne received nothing under the restatement except reimbursement of $3,200 in documented out-of-pocket expenses for hospice supplies. She moved to a condo across town. We do not meet for coffee. The public consequences were smaller than TV shows make them, but real. Dylan's LLC dissolved quietly in June. He started a new job and learned to say less in rooms with microphones. Kendra sent me a text on July 1st. "I'm sorry for my part. I didn't see clearly." I told her, clarity is a gift you sometimes have to push for. Suzanne sent a letter on lined paper saying she loved my father deeply and never meant to harm us. I folded it and put it behind the restatement in the binder. Love and harm are not opposites. Sometimes they are just neighbors whose fences need fixing. The private consequences were heavier. Grief doesn't finish just because a judge writes an order. Sometimes I catch myself reaching for my phone to tell Dad a story about a leaky coil or a summer thunderhead blowing over the house. Sometimes I drive past the old office and the sign still has his name, sun-faded. But I also sleep soundly, not because we won money. I've already spent more on roof repairs than I wanted to, but because we won the shape of the truth. Running this channel after her lies means I get hundreds of comments like, "You should have hired a bigger attorney," or "I would have flipped the table." I won't pretend I didn't think about both, but what worked here was not a temper or a miracle. It was receipts. It was a guardrail clause Dad insisted on in a fit of foresight. A notary who kept a journal when she wasn't required to? A hospital log that was honest about morphine. A purchase agreement with boilerplate that accidentally favored the honest. And a judge who believed that conditions mean what they say. It was also community. A foreman who slid me a copy of a contract. An aunt who repeated a rumor that turned out to aim me toward the right file. A brother whose hand under the table kept my own from shaking. When my hands did shake because they did, it was when I pulled the original restatement from that white file box. Paper is ordinary, but when it becomes the last artifact of a person's backbone, it feels like bone. I ran my fingers over Dad's signature and thought about all the times he told me, if you don't want someone to move the fence, put it in the ground deep. He put this fence in the ground on June 12, 2023. People who came later tried to move it with speed and a stamp, but they didn't dig. We did. If you are in the place I was in December, standing in a polished office with people who want your seat, know this. You don't have to blow up to be strong. You can be steady. You can read. You can ask for logs and emails and witness names. You can file pro se if you need to. You can record the sounds of truth in your own kitchen. And if someone tells you it's too late or already decided, remember that courts exist because sometimes people declare victory before the starter pistol has fired. There is one last scene I'll leave you with. Late May, a thunderstorm, gutters shrieking like they were warning ships. Caleb and I sat on the living room floor of the house we grew up in, pizza box between us, the binder on the coffee table, the deed in a manila envelope next to two cores sweating into coasters. The maple outside threw shadows against the windows like an old film. We didn't talk about money. We talked about Dad forgetting the turkey in '09 and our mom's laugh in the summer we patched the porch together with plywood and prayer. Then it got quiet in the way that hurts and heals. When the thunder rolled away, I said, "We did right." Caleb nodded. We did right. Sometimes justice is loud orders read into microphones, stamps thunking, a gavel. But more often it's this, a quiet room, a house that still stands, two siblings holding a fence line their father drew, and the knowledge that when someone lied, we spoke. And then I saw the clause nobody expected. On myself. It wasn't in a document. It was in a decision I didn't want to make. Suzanne wanted some of Dad's tools for memory. I could have said no. I let her take a toolbox, the red one with the dented corner. Justice doesn't require punishment when a line doesn't demand it. It requires proportion. I kept Dad's level. I hung it in the hallway, and sometimes when I walk by it, I check the bubble and feel something settle a little closer to center. If you stayed to the end, you're my kind of person, calm, stubborn, hungry for receipts and fairness. 96% of viewers who watch these stories aren't subscribed. If you want more true, detailed breakdowns of how families and money collide and how to get to justice without burning your life down, subscribe, like, and tell me in the comments what you'd have done differently.